I saw an infographic on social media recently that said that 81% of people polled said they want to write a book, and yet only about 3% of people complete the book. That says to say nothing about publishing it. And this kind of brought me to one of my favorite subjects which I talk about on this channel all the time, and that's writing. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I'm going to give you some words of caution. On the one hand, about taking advice from YouTube channels and writers on YouTube. On the other hand, I'm going to do the hypocritical thing, and I'm going to turn around and give you my top 7 pieces of writing advice. So one thing you might know if you watch my channel is that I love to watch writing videos on YouTube. I love all of them. I love writing vlogs. I love tip videos. I love insider, how to do this if you're self-published, how to get an agent, if you're going the traditional route, the ins and outs of publishing. I love videos from authors who talk about how they wrote their book, and I love writing sprint videos when I get a chance to catch them and participate. I love all of that content. It's one of my favorite things on YouTube other than BookTube stuff. In part, I think this has to do with a lifelong interest I've had in authors, and in part I think it's because I thought, and I still think, that to be a writer, which I am, I kind of thought I had to pay attention to the way writers did things. And that then is where I want to start with this kind of words of caution about watching YouTube and writing content on YouTube. So the first thing I want to say is that don't let anything you see from any of the people who create writing content on YouTube convince you that you've waited too long, or you don't have the right skills, or you can't do it. It can be kind of defeating because you see all these people who have writing channels and they're talking about the books they've self-published, or talking about getting agents. They're talking about this time that they have to do their writing, and it all looks great and it all seems like they're making lots of money and being really successful, and some no doubt are. I'm not suggesting they're lying. But it can be intimidating. It can make it seem like this is something, that I probably can't do. And to be honest with you, I think you can if you deal with some basic things. So the first tips I have coming up. The people who you see making these videos, they are showing you their success because that it's what they want to put out there. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm not saying they're being duplicitous, but they're showing you the good things, the kind of really great writing days they had, or the days in which they got everything set up exactly right, or they're telling you when they've had success, and that's all fine. But don't let that intimidate you. The second thing I'd warn you about is the obsession with word count. If there's one thing that bugs me the most about writing videos on YouTube is this obsession with word count. And to be honest with you, I'm just going to come right at it, and I'm going to blame NaNoWriMo for this. That NaNoWriMo has convinced people that a certain number of words equals a book, and it does not. Word count does not equal a book. And just achieving a certain number of words in a day, in a week, in a month is not achieving completing a book. So you need to think about when you see all these people talking about how many words they typed, keep in mind they're not talking about how they have to go back and revise all those words and how many of those words are going to be cut. They're literally just talking about raw words written on the page or on the screen or however it comes out. And that can be really deceiving, particularly when you see people who have these really high word counts, and you're looking at yourself and you see the word count on your word processing program. You think, well, I'm nowhere close to that. Don't make that the measure. Write the book. Write the book until the book is done, and then go back and revise it. And don't worry so much about word count. If you want to use words as a measure of how fast you're going, that's fine. But don't make that. Don't let the writing influencers convince you that word count is an end unto itself. And I'm not saying they're all trying to, but that it does feel that way sometimes. Also, kind of keep in mind that the authors you see, like me and others, lots of others, though not all, that you see on YouTube talking about writing, are building their platform. That platform helps them to sell books. That platform helps them to maybe acquire an agent. That platform might help convince them, a publisher, to publish their book, because that platform is free publicity, and it's a free way for them to get their names out there and to reach people and to create a community of people who might want to buy their books. There's nothing wrong with this, but I do think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. Again, I'm not suggesting these writers are being evil or sneaky. The best ones, I think, tell you up front exactly what they're doing. Hey, I have a new book out, and here it is. There's a link down below. By the way, hey, I'm going to have a new book out in July. There'll be a link down below where you can go and pre-order it. But that kind of thing I think is fine. But don't misunderstand what they're up to or what they're doing, because part of what they're doing is building that community. Part of what they're doing is building that platform. And the last thing I'll tell you is something you've heard many times and is associated with YouTube videos in general. Don't think you have to have all that stuff. You don't need a fancy leather-bound notebook to write. You don't need a special word processing program. You don't need a special kind of tea or a mug or fairy lights or candles or a cottage core feeling in your house. If you're inclined, I'll tell you, you don't need a glass of whiskey, you don't need a cup of coffee, you don't need those things. All you need to write is something to write on, computer, piece of paper, pen, and the time to sit down and write it. And it's that time which is really most important, which then is going to lead me into my top 7 writing tips. So my top 7 writing tips are: number 1 is to write. You get better through practice, and you will get better at writing the more you write. And what I would suggest is that you write everything. I know what a lot of people want to do, what a lot of people on YouTube doing in terms of writing is they want to write a novel. They talk about writing this novel, even though they've never written a story or an essay or a poem or any of those other things. And what I would say is that, just like I would not just like we shouldn't have young athletes specializing in the sport, don't necessarily think you have to specialize in one thing. All forms of writing will make you better and will inform the writing that you end up deciding you want to concentrate on. So, I would kind of write everything and, spend some time actually writing. Spend more time writing than setting up to write. That would be kind of a key thing. So the second thing I would say then, this goes right along with writing, is read. I think you have to read to write, and you have to read the things that you want to write. If you want to write, adult fantasy books or romantasy books, that's what you should be reading. Try to find the best examples of that and read it. Not so you can copy it, but so you can see how the framework of that genre works, and what are the conventions of that genre. That's important stuff. So read the stuff you want to write. One thing I think is a really kind of a cool way to think about writing and learn about writing is to write book reviews. And 2 great book reviewers who are on BookTube, Hannah from Hannah's Books and Steve Donahue, are just write brilliantly, and you can read their work for free in Open Letters Review. So read the things you want to write, and write a little bit of everything. So read a little bit of everything. I can't help but think that that's kind of important to making yourself into a better writer. And then down to kind of really practical things. So 3 of my most important pieces or tips, writing tips, come from famous authors. And when I tell you these 3 authors, you're going to get an idea immediately of what I value in writing, or at least, how I kind of model my writing. The first is Ernest Hemingway. I can't remember exactly how Hemingway said it, but essentially his advice was never to write yourself out. In other words, never stop writing when you're out of ideas. Like, stop writing before then, so you have an idea about where to start the next day. So as tempting as it can be to get that whole great idea you have down for that chapter or that character or whatever you're working on, I follow Hemingway's advice, and I make sure I know what I'm going to do next when I stop the writing for the day. And that gives me an automatic place to pick up. It gives me something to think about when I'm not writing, when I'm not physically writing. It gives me something to think about that I can work over and I can develop and add things to. So when I do sit down to write, it oftentimes then is a lot easier. Second piece of writing comes from the author Norman Maclean, who wrote A River Runs Through It. And in A River Runs Through It, one of the young characters' dad is teaching him writing, and he says, "The art of writing lies in thrift," by which he meant that the best writing is the writing that perhaps is the least adorned. Now, you can go way too far with that, but I do think there is a valuable piece of advice there to, maybe start off by doing less and then add more when you're into the revision process. And, that way you're not having to cut things that you that you put in. It's always harder, I think, for writers, I think it is, to cut things than to add things. So, I think there is some value in that idea that the art of writing lies in thrift. And then the last thing specific to a writer is from Elmore Leonard. And Elmore Leonard had, I think, 10 great writing tips. My favorite of his has to do with dialogue tags, in which he says dialogue tags should just be said or asked. Where are you going? He asked. To the park, he said. That those are the dialogue tags that he uses. And I would also then add to that something that I think all writers do. Once you've established who the two people are and you have conversations kind of back and forth in dialogue, leave out the tags when you can. But mainly he was trying to caution people against, where are you going? He gasped, that kind of thing. Because that, he argued, and I believe, is not the place to introduce that kind of emotion, or that tag shouldn't carry that weight. If you think about how rarely you notice dialogue tags, I think you'll see the value in that. The sixth piece of advice I have is to listen to your work. Most word processing programs, even Microsoft Word, have a function where you can have it read your text to you. I found this to be incredibly valuable at picking up on the rhythm of my writing, helping to vary the rhythm of the sentences, making sure I don't start sentences off, a lot of sentences off in the exact same way. Oftentimes I can hear the awkward phrase before I can see the awkward phrase, and so having my word processor read my work to me has been really helpful. And then my last piece of advice has to do with the revising process and beta readers and having other people read it. You should definitely have other people read your work. People who you trust to be helpfully critical is what I would say. But I would not send your work out unless you're part of a writing group or an MFA requires you to do so. I would not send your work out to beta readers for other people to read until you have completed your second draft, until you've completed and polished your second draft. I personally don't see the value in sending something off that is not, in your opinion at that moment, as good as it can be. And so I would, tell you to avoid sending it out, because what's going to happen, I think, if you send it out and you haven't, made it as good as it can be, this is going to have two effects on your beta reader. One, they're going to literally tell you everything that's wrong, and you're going to get all that feedback back, and it's going to be a huge amount of feedback. And that might be intimidating and keep you from revising. Or second, your beta reader might think, okay, well, they're not really quite finished with this, and therefore I won't tell them all the things that they need to know. So, I've done this and sent my work out way before it was ready, and I know the impact that had on the people that I've had read my work. So that would be my last piece of advice. Anyway, there you go. There is my incredibly hypocritical video warning you about YouTube writing advice and then giving you YouTube writing advice. Anyway, if you're a writer, and keep in mind, a writer is anyone who writes. You don't have to have been published to be a writer. If you're a writer and you have other tips you think are great, leave them in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching.